I'm gonna throw out a sentence and you can just kind of react to it and tell me what you think. I think the pilot is one of the weaker episodes of the show.
Really?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Serialized, the podcast where we break down hit television shows. I'm your host, Kino, and I'm joined for this show by Stephanie from Sopranos Blueprints. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Over the course of the next 6 episodes, including this one, we're going to be breaking down The Sopranos. But before we do that, I wanted to just give you an opportunity to intro yourself to the audience about what you do as a content creator and where they can kind of check you out.
Sure. As Kino introduced me, I'm Stephanie. My YouTube channel and blog are Sopranos Blueprint. I'm also on Twitter at srosendorf1014. Essentially, I do content creation. I create trivia. I publish it weekly every Sunday, and I try to every couple days basically publish new YouTube videos on Sopranos content just from a different fresh perspective. And I try to stay engaged and really keep the show alive through that.
We've known each other for, I think we met maybe a couple of years ago. I invited you onto my previous podcast. We had a discussion there. And then last year we did a live in-person event in New York City, which was really cool that you agreed to actually attend that. I wasn't sure if anyone would be interested in doing that, but that was an awesome event where we got to hang out with some fans of, Sopranos content and put on a live event like that. So
It was really awesome. I loved how detailed and how thoughtful the questions were. Like you could tell that all the people that were there like really knew their stuff. So it was just like interesting to hear their points of view.
yeah, it was really awesome. And again, to have that in-person experience, which is, so rare for what we do on the internet here. But all of that made me really excited to have you on as the guest for the Sopranos discussion, because you obviously know this show very, very well, as do I. And yeah, we're gonna be breaking down season 1 in this episode. We are not necessarily limiting ourselves to only season 1 discussion. So if you, for some reason, have not seen the entire show, but you're listening to this podcast anyway, just be warned, we might reference things that happen in future episodes. It's always surprising to me how much people will not finish a show, but then they'll immediately go consume some podcasts or some videos about it. I got flack all the time when I did my Soprano log series about like referencing future episodes, and they're like, I'm watching along with you here. So I just wanted to put that disclaimer out there.
I was going to say that's interesting because I try to stop myself from looking at anything before I finish a series, just because I'm like, I kind of like, if I look at something and it's like, oh, a video about such and such, I'm like, you're going to see something in there. So I generally tend to avoid consuming any media about something before I'm finished. But yeah, I guess you never
And
know.
it's hard too, because like The Sopranos is such an old show by this point that like, people are talking about it. People are talking about the entire thing. And, luckily The Sopranos is one of these shows that like even if you're spoiled about what happens, it doesn't matter. Like the show is that good, and it's not built upon a premise of suspense or like, oh, what's going to happen next. There's an element of that for sure. And if you can go in blind, that's even better. But like, I think most people, including myself, heard about the famous cut to black ending before we even watched the first episode. And it really doesn't hurt your experience. I mean, the joy of The Sopranos is just going through it and like meeting these characters, learning about them, and just enjoying the ride rather than being like so plot focused,
Absolutely. That's what, like, right. I remember right when I finished the first time, I was like, I have to start over right away. I was like, because it's more of like, it's a continual journey of kind of like getting to know the characters and sort of like your own evolving perspective. I feel like watching it through for the first time is really like just the starting point.
And I'm actually someone too who I started watching clips on YouTube before I ever watched a single full episode, just because they got recommended to me and I would check them out. And even experiencing it that way, like there was still so much like great material there. But obviously watching it, starting at episode 1 is the best way to do that. And that leads us kind of into our discussion here. I want to kind of start with the pilot episode here. I'm gonna throw out a sentence and you can just kind of react to it and tell me what you think. I think in hindsight, looking at the entire series, I think the pilot is one of the weaker episodes of the show. What do you think about that?
Really? So I think if you're thinking in terms of it being connected to the rest of the show in terms of consistency, I'd say yes, that it is a little bit weaker in that sense, because when you think of things, even like when Syl, comes up to the rest of them when they're standing outside, or when they're sitting outside Sentani, it's like, did you go to high school with a guy named Artie Bucco? Then after 46 long, clearly like they all had known each other for a while, and little things like that. But I think for me, it really hooked me and grabbed me in. But why I'm curious about why you think the pilot was on the weaker side.
I didn't say it was bad television or bad episode. I think it's an amazing piece of television, of course. I'm just saying I think that when you look at where this series goes from here, not just the plot details not really connecting, like Silvio not knowing Artie Bucco or Tony being referred to as the boss of North Jersey, that I can forgive some of that stuff, but my main thing, again, just looking back, and I know I'm starting off a little spicy here. I like having
No, it's
some
good. I
hot
like the
takes.
spice.
Yeah, it makes it a little bit more
Spice is
interesting.
good. Yeah, exactly. It keeps people listening.
Yeah. So, but my main thing is that like a lot of the characters don't feel fully formed yet, and obviously, right, it's the first episode. It was made a year before the rest of the series got written, and they're not going to have all this figured out. But that's kind of my running criticism that I'm going to be bringing up throughout the entire season one, is that a lot of these characters don't feel quite right yet. Like Tony does not feel quite like Tony to me in this season, and you can say certain things like, he changed and he got worse over the years, sure. But the fact of him like kind of crying in therapy about, the Ducks and his family, I'm not saying that like he can't have those emotions, but it just doesn't feel like he's reacting the way that like Tony does throughout the rest of the series.
It's interesting you say that, because one thing that certainly sticks out from the rest of the series is the fact that we have Tony's narration, in terms of the style of the show, where that's as some people I think like that, and then some people prefer sort of the different style. But yeah, definitely, like if you would just watch the pilot, I feel like they would think that they'd be getting a lot more of Tony crying, but we really only see Tony crying. I'm trying to think of in therapy with Dr. Melfi. I can't think. He showed more of his rage. I guess like things like depression is rage turned inward. He showed the outward rage more in Dr. Melfi's office, like in response to sad things. Oh no, that's right. He does cry with her in the strong silent
Yes,
fight
about the horse.
with the horse.
Yeah, and Melfi even has a line about that later where she says like Tony calls himself the
The
sad
sad
clown,
clown.
and then Melfi is like, that's not actually how you react. You don't like make jokes. You like rage out and hurt people. Yeah, so I'm not saying the pilot episode is a bad episode overall. I think when I ranked it, I might have given it I think I gave it a B rating. I think in hindsight I might even go to C, but I just think that overall with season one, and this is only with the hindsight, I think, of the entire series in mind. When I did my rewatch after I finished all my Soprano logs and stuff like that, I had a hard time getting back into season one specifically, just because a lot of these interactions don't feel fully correct to me the way starting in season two really feels like, okay, this is how the characters are. They know who they are and how to write them. And that's pretty typical of a lot of shows. A lot of shows they take a season to kind of really flesh the characters out and know who they are and take off from there.
But I can see that though in terms of there definitely is a contrast. I mean, the whole, of course, it gets progressively darker throughout the series. But yeah, in the first season, there's definitely there's like an innocence and almost like a naivete to it in a way, just in terms of like things that you think are possible, or things that like seem that appear different than they're actually going to be. Like even when I think of like in Meadowlands, when Tony's sitting at the table with Jimmy Altieri, Ray Curto, and one other person. I'm forgetting.
Larry
It's one
Breesy.
of, yes, Larry Breesy, and it's like you kind of be like, oh, these are going to be like the guys there kind of hanging out with his crew, and you really don't end up seeing them all together that much, like for the rest of the series after season one, anyway.
I'm gonna circle back to that point when we talk a little bit later about like nobody knows anything and Big Pussy, because I have some thoughts about that. But yeah, I think like moving into like episode 2, 46 long, there's some stuff in this episode that like there's a scene of Tony offering to make Carmela lunch after they had a hard day dealing with Livia, and I'm just that scene always strikes me as just so unlike Tony. He's so not concerned about household chores or stuff like that. And again, maybe the idea is that like he got worse over time, like when early on when he's younger, like in this first season, he's more attentive to things like that. But I'm not the only one who kind of noticed things like this. I put in our show notes here a quote from Alan Sepinwall, who is the great TV critic who covered
Yes,
The
he's great.
Sopranos, wrote a fantastic book called The Sopranos Sessions. But
We
even
love
he
it.
said that like some of these ideas feel fully formed, but others feel like David Chase is still fiddling with the knobs and levers. And like the specific example he points out is the car theft storyline that happens in 46 long, where they're tracking down the teacher's car, and it's feels very comedic, feels like a little Goodfellas-ish. The narration in the pilot obviously is also very Goodfellas, just like they haven't fully figured out the Soprano identity yet, and they're still kind of leading more into like Goodfellas territory there.
Yeah, and they're also like sort of trying out almost like pairing different characters together. Like they have, like you said for the car scene, they have Big Puss and Polly, and then the episode after that, which I'm sure we'll talk about, we then have Polly and Sil kind of, being in a little pair going and doing their business together. So I feel yeah, definitely the experimentation, and then of course the initial difference of it not opening directly to the theme song, in terms of the 46 long something
Yeah, the
else that.
cold open. It's strange some of the choices they make throughout the show. Like they do these like weird one-off things. Like again, the first episode has that narration, very much kind of like Goodfellas. This episode has a cold open, which they never do again. There'll be some episodes later that will do stuff like having the credits play over footage, which is very unusual.
Yeah, like the For All Debts Public and Private, how like
Yes,
they're
it's like they were experimenting with different stuff of this series, which is totally fine, but it's unique compared to some other shows that kind of have a more like strict like branding or strict visual guide of how this works. Like David Chase kind of it feels like he wasn't afraid to try different stuff and just never do it again.
Yeah, definitely. And I think they all were kind of, it was like a, kind of on the job training essentially with their, with season one or any first season of a series. And I think this was his first big TV series he was, directing, right? So it was kind of, I think a lot of it was, him experimenting with just what he could do in terms of how far he could go.
Well, I mean, it's also just like reinventing like television, right? Like it's like nothing was the same after this season of The Sopranos. So, as much as keep in mind, as much as I criticize this season, in particular for not kind of fitting with the rest of it, this was a absolute smash success that completely changed the television landscape forever, to the point where everything was basically trying to imitate The Sopranos from here on out.
Yeah, and it's kind of how I think when I watch, any sort of in particular like HBO show that's come after The Sopranos, I have like The Sopranos. It's almost like the blueprint for me for sort of future prestige TV, and I'll see something and I'll think that makes me think of The Sopranos, or that came from The Sopranos, or sometimes they'll even explicitly mention The Sopranos in the TV show itself.
It's funny, you were talking to me before we started the podcast. You've been really getting into Game of Thrones lately, and when they pitched Game of Thrones to HBO, they said it's The Sopranos set in Middle Earth. So
That's so funny.
yeah, and
Yeah.
obviously like the character drama angle of the show, that obviously kind of influenced by the way they told the character drama of Sopranos.
Oh yeah, and then also it's a lot of similar, like Tim Van Patten, and directed a few episodes. Alex Sakharov. So there were a couple in terms of just the cinematography and the strong visuals. Yeah, sometimes I'll see the names in the credits and I'll be like, oh yep, that's a Sopranos. That's a Sopranos person. I'm not surprised, but like this is so good.
Yeah, we have some classic directors this season. Alan Coulter, Tim Van Patten, Alan Taylor, John Patterson. Some of these guys would become kind of like the defining directors of future episodes. Like
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're kind of like the gold standard. I feel like for future series that other, it's not surprising that other, other shows like how also like Boardwalk Empire, how they, did Ben Patton.
it's funny we don't pay as much attention to episode directors. They kind of come and go. They're not as like a film director. We really follow them closely, but television directors, they kind of fade into the background compared to showrunners. But I know for something like The Sopranos, the Alan Taylor in specific was such a key part of that, to the point where David Chase would later have him direct The Many Saints of Newark when he couldn't do it, unfortunately. So yeah, these guys they play much more of a background role compared to the showrunners, but definitely a lot of this stuff is due to their influence.
Yep, yep, definitely.
Moving into episode 3 here, denial, anger, and acceptance. We have some notes here. I just noticed that the ending scene with Meadows singing and juxtaposed with the Brendan Falone hit, very Godfather like. Very much mirrors the ending hits of that movie. And again, I think this is David Chase and the writers kind of going back to the mafia well here, kind of imitating Goodfellas, imitating Godfather, imitating the classic mob stuff before they kind of really find their own style of storytelling that will, carry forth beyond this.
Yeah, and I think definitely what you said about the sort of Godfather theme at the end, and then in terms of like with the ending scene with how Meadow and Hunter, how they were all dressed in black and white, that sort of makes me think of duality and this good and evil, and something that's a recurring theme on the show. I know it's not just them in black and white; there are other characters we see throughout the show that are like wearing black and white as well, but I feel like that, it went with the whole theme of the back and forth, very Godfather of these two sort of dimensions.
It also kind of like the whole Meadow wearing white thing too kind of harkens back to this thing about her being an angel, which when we get to college, I want to circle back because I want to hear your thoughts on that. That's a common thing that people talk about with Meadow.
Definitely, and also with Meadow, I thought it was interesting how they pulled how they made the plot line in denial or acceptance about her getting crystal meth, because I feel like we're used to sort of this typical like narrative in shows like where you're like, oh, teenagers doing drugs, you're like, oh, they're sort of like a bum or like just some like kid that's like doing badly in school. So actually, I think it was interesting how they sort of flipped the script here, and it was like, no, she wanted to get drugs so that she could do better in school. So it was just, I think it was just an interesting and different way of showing teenage drug use.
Yeah, the way they handle the kids is very interesting this season. There's an equal focus on both Meadow and AJ. In the next episode, Meadow lands very much more of an AJ focused episode. We have a whole plot line in this episode about him dealing with a school bully, a friend slash bully that he kind of the whole point of the storyline is to make him realize that his dad's in the mafia, that this is not like a normal upbringing that he's going through. That's seen at the end with him looking at his dad and his friends at the funeral. I had to say though, I always felt like the plot line with the bully specifically felt a little off. It felt a little like this doesn't quite feel like AJ.
Yeah, it's fun when there's a scene, the scene of when they're in the hallway fighting, and then like the kids are all like storming around them and they're like fight, fight, fight. It kind of reminds me of the scene later on when Christopher shows up to the Esplanade and he goes in and goes up and gets in Patsy Parisi's face. I was like, this is like the adult version of that. It just in terms of like visually speaking, it's funny. It just kind of reminds me of that.
Yeah, the way they establish AJ in later seasons, he's much more non-confrontational. He's not someone who gets into fights. He's more, some people might even call him a pussy. I don't think that's what the writers were going for, but it's more so like a contrast to his father, where his father's like very much aggressive and an attack guy. AJ's more like an internal, like he fights more with himself than other people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like even yeah, when you think with the kid on the bicycle or like all the that he didn't like that. He didn't like violence. Like it doesn't give him a rush.
And again, maybe you could say that like this is him when he's younger. And there's a lot of kids who like, when they're younger, they might be more aggressive and stuff like that. And then when they become teenagers and stuff or adults, they lose some of that. But again, I think it's more that they don't quite know what they want to do with AJ yet. I think starting in season 2 and beyond, they have a much clearer idea of like contrasting AJ with Tony versus this season. It felt more like AJ was just a mini version of Tony, and we'll talk about that more in Down Neck too. But
Yeah, I was just gonna thinking of Down Neck, especially. Oh yeah, with the whole conversation with Melfi, but I don't want him to be like me.
it felt like that's the way they were going this season. But then maybe because of the way Robert Eiler was acting or the way he kind of grew up, they're like, it's better if he goes like the opposite direction of Tony here, and that leads to a lot more interesting stories than just kind of AJ being, literally Tony Jr.
hmm I do like at the end of Meadowlands. I think the whole, Jackie Aprile Senior's funeral is just a very, I don't know, powerful scene. Just them at the cemetery, and then of course with look on down from the bridge at the end. I feel like it was sort of a good moment of summarizing sort of what was ahead. Like, now I got a brand new lightning rod on top to take the hits, which of course Junior he does, as I see.
It's interesting that in the last few episodes, it's been ramping up the plot of who's going to be the next boss. Jackie's introduced in 46 Long. We know he's sick. In Denial, Anger, Acceptance, he's dying more. Tony's dealing with Meadowlands is the confrontation with Junior, and then Tony giving him the fake title. But then we have kind of a little bit of a break in college. That plot line takes a break while Tony goes and takes Meadow on his college, tour here.
One of my favorite episodes.
It's David Chase's favorite episode too, because of that self-contained nature. It's like we're going to leave this storyline behind for a little bit here, and we're going to really focus in on the relationship between Tony and Meadow, and then Carmela and Father Phil. And again, we talked about last episode being more of an AJ focused storyline. This one is fully, in the Meadow camp about her relationship with her father.
Absolutely. It really, established, I think, him as that family man and Meadow as, daddy's girl. And I think it's interesting as I think it sets up their relationship for the rest of the series, which of course, goes back and forth. But it's, when they have their talk at dinner, a very telling moment as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, my most famous video was talking about just how much this episode in particular, more so than even the pilot and the rest of the episodes, this episode in particular changed television forever. And I think this is where we really see the Sopranos kind of cement itself. The previous 4 episodes were still good, don't get me wrong, but this one is the first episode which really kind of is like an S tier episode for me. Like, we have very strong themes, very strong character moments here that will really carry forth throughout the rest of the series. Like the choice Tony makes to pursue vengeance instead of being honest with Meadow, that's a really profound moment, and it's going to have important ramifications for the rest of the series.
Absolutely. I think something that's interesting that always sticks out to me, and definitely let's talk about the guardian angel thing in a second, but I think with Tony, the fact that he was in that moment so reckless with Meadow when he was at first trying to chase after Febby and they was like zigzagging, in and out of traffic. Like, I mean, I think it was one of the rare moments where he was, he could have put Meadow in great harm. He could have ended up hitting a car head on. So it's just, I feel like in that moment he was almost like temporarily possessed, not like literally possessed, but like he was so, I mean, I guess anyone would be shocked too, because they, what are the odds of that? But I think, yeah, he was pretty laser focused from then on.
Yeah, circling back to that Meadow as Tony's guardian angel, that's a common thing people have talked about in the series. What do you make of that idea that Meadow is Tony's guardian angel and that she saved him in this episode from the hitman?
I like in terms of the overall concept of Meadow being his guardian angel, because I do think that it's specifically because of how she was walking with him, because she needed him to help her get slowly into the motel room. and because she was standing there with him and got, made him distracted. I do think that there would have been a much higher chance of Febby actually trying to shoot Tony and perhaps being successful at it if Meadow hadn't been there. And then, of course, we could tie the guardian angel to, later on in Mayhem. But also, I think we could then use the guardian angel thing as a possible contrast later on down the line if we're thinking about the series finale where Meadow wouldn't have been able to get to him. But also related to the guardian angel, I think we could also think of Christopher in that sense too. Then in one case, like in Isabella, which I know we'll talk about a little later in this episode, but he actually blocked this shot too for those first assassins. So in that sense, and I guess maybe that goes into sort of overall concepts of like people can you can have different angels in your life at different times, etc. But anyway, I like the guardian angel concept, but also a recognition that guardian angel isn't necessarily going to be around forever.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like the idea too, and I think there's a lot to there. My one criticism is maybe of this episode in particular of that concept is if you watch the episode, it's not the fact that Meadows with Tony that makes Febby be like, maybe I shouldn't kill this guy. He's a father like me, or he has a kid too. He sees an elderly couple that's like coming out from their room or something, and he's like, okay, there's witnesses, yeah. And I think that was a mistake. I think like they should have the Febby just be like, I can't kill this guy in front of Meadow. It's wrong, because I think that would have also, in addition to reinforcing the Meadow as his guardian angel trope that they're kind of going for throughout the series, it would have also made Febby a little bit more of a sympathetic character, and therefore Tony killing him at the end and not showing him that mercy that he showed him, it would have really driven home the point that like this is Tony's dark side here. This is him being a horrible person. And again, there's more context in that episode about like David Chase was kind of forced by the studio to put the fact that he was a drug dealer.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. I was gonna say that I think they had to like basically in order to they didn't want to make Tony look too unsympathetic. So, by making Febby this, guy who's an asshole who then essentially told them to take out both of them. So, it really, yeah, like
Again,
yeah,
and
like
we can chalk that up to HBO's stupid influence, which is one of the only few times they've ever done something like that. But I think like in my perfect rendition of the series, fixing all the little mistakes, I think that would have been a lot better presentation and really kind of hammered home this idea that Tony or that Meadow is this guardian angel of Tony's who saved him multiple times, but who also becomes corrupted later on. And we'll save that discussion for future seasons, but she becomes a corrupted version too.
yeah, and that's like they have the corrupted version of their dinner in the series finale. Like it's like basically like the polar opposite of the dinner they have in college. It's like literally Meadow does a complete 180.
Also, the
Um,
opposite of the dinner they have in I Dream of Jeannie Cusimano, but we'll talk about
oh
that
yes,
in a little
that's it.
bit
That's
here.
I love that's what we could. There could be a whole like probably multiple episodes just dedicated to like season 1 and season 6 that be parallels like from the
Yes.
very beginning.
Yeah,
Um,
we'll definitely
but I
talk about
digress.
that when we get there. But yeah, so moving on to Pax Soprana, a title I love, by the way. I love that playoff of Pax Romana,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
the Italian
I like
link
how they
there.
do that with the episode. Yeah, with the episode titles.
There's some other episode titles that I'm not a fan of, but this is one I actually really like. Yeah, we introduced to Johnny Sack, who will become a very key guy. We're not introduced to the Lupertazis, interesting enough. Like that won't be a thing until season 3. Johnny Sack just kind of represents the vague New York
Like New York,
families,
yeah,
air
the New
quotes.
York.
Yeah, there's even later on when Junior's arrested, they say that they want Mangano and Tracy, and later on I'm like, who's Mangano and Tracy? Like those are not any Lupertazzi guys that we know about. I have some headcanon about who those guys are supposed to be, but again, understanding that like they don't have all the details worked out
Or
yet.
Johnny Depp's brother-in-law Andy. That comes up in season 4.
Yeah, That's a whole other thing too, because I
Yeah,
don't.
that's all other
Yeah,
all
but
other thing.
you know, this episode in particular too. Also, it's starting to feel more like Sopranos to me. Like the whole thing with Tony and Junior, the ending sequence with the FBI here. This is, I think, the first introduction we get to the FBI. I don't think we've seen them before this, but that obviously is hinting at a big thing that's going to climax at the end of this season.
Yeah, and I also like think Carmela, she's like accepted the fact that, that Tony's seeing one with therapist, and she's, trying to like make an effort to, be supportive in it kind of at the end. And of course when he says, "You're not just in my life, you are my life," it's, clearly he's not telling the truth, but it's still a sweet moment anyway.
It is a sweet moment, and it's moments like that between Tony and Carmela that, as bad as it got between the two of them, you see like genuine love there. That like they did love each other. Was it toxic? Absolutely. Were they both at fault for a lot of bad stuff in their marriage? Tony more so than Carmela, but even still, but there is a genuine chemistry there that I see between the two of them that I don't see in other television shows between husbands and wives. Like Breaking Bad, no spoilers for that, but I don't see
No,
that
there's
same
not
kind
there's
of
not there's not
love.
as much love. There's not definitely not as much as spark.
Yeah, it's just not, it's not there. But Tony and Carmela, they absolutely love each other, and I love Carmela focused episodes like this. I think the whole thing with being impotent and like that putting a strain on their marriage, I think, is a very realistic plot that like a lot of shows wouldn't do something like that. They wouldn't go down that rabbit hole there. But like Carmela just feeling like he's not interested in her is a very realistic kind of marital problem to have.
Oh, absolutely. And also like just goes to show like, oh, there's this, this mob boss guy, but they have problems just like any other couple would be, and it's, not always very glamorous.
The whole Tony Melfi attraction thing, we got hints of that in, I think, Denial, Anger, Acceptance. That's, or maybe it was Meadowlands. I don't remember which one, but we have Tony basically being like in love with her for a moment, kissing her out of nowhere. Obviously, in this one, he's thinking he has inappropriate dreams about her, and in season 5, he'll pursue her
Yeah, he does it
formally,
again. Yeah.
but it doesn't pop up as much as you kind of think it would. Like again, another show might have gone down the route of like, ooh, Tony and Melfi, like there's a hidden romance there, but the series really doesn't go down that route too much.
Because that would have ruined. I feel like just like how how Dr. Melfi didn't tell him about Jesus Rossi. I feel like if they had sort of hooked up and like started become a thing, that would have it would have taken her into that new territory where she couldn't really have that higher moral ground necessarily if she'd gotten involved with him like that. Yeah, I think it was that she should have by this point stopped seeing him as a patient if she had been doing the standard thing, but obviously that wouldn't be very interesting for the show. So
Yeah. And I also think too, they went down a more realistic path that like a lot of like she's attracted to Tony for sure. There's an attraction there,
oh
but
yeah, and
like
she even tells him in season 5, she says, "No, you have a very nice face."
yeah, but most, professional people like this would not, go down a relationship. That's very much like a TV kind of trope that like, oh, falling in love with your patient. But like Melfi is like professional enough to realize that one, that's not professional for her to do, but also like, yeah, this guy is fucked up. Like he's got not just that he's a murderer and a mobster and stuff, but he's also like whiny and like pathetic at times too. And it's very
A
realistic that
little
she wouldn't,
boy. She's like, "He acts like a
yeah,
little boy."
that she wouldn't want to go down that path. So again, I think that kind of realism there. And this season in particular is one of the strongest, I think, about the psychiatry angle. As the seasons go on, that will become less and less important. Like it's still important there, but even Tony will say in later seasons that like we're not really discussing my psychological problems anymore.
I
We're just
know. It's
hanging out.
I know. I was watching a clip of that very thing today where she's trying to convince, like, say, now that we've gotten past the baseline depression, we can get really to deep into what you're really after. And he's like, I'm calling the like flag
Yeah.
on the play.
Yeah, but this season very much is about the therapy, and it's like it's such a critical part of the storyline and the
Oh,
actual
yeah,
plot.
The Prozac, and
Yeah.
even, like, the then she's pregnant with lithium, which I think is something kind of a little odd, like, that she would have pretend that, but anyway, yeah, it's very I think they very much wanna show, like, this is the sort of center place where, you get to learn more about Tony Soprano and all his various issues.
Yes. And moving on to like the episode Down Neck here. One, I just had a random funny gag note, which is when they're talking,
Yeah.
the therapist talking to Tony and Carmela about AJ, he says AJ has strong skills in spatial orientation, which I think is meant to be just bullshit, like just something nice to say. The same way that Janice constantly brings up her extraordinary visualization skills. It's like it's a meaningless compliment. It doesn't. They're just trying to like before I get into the problems and you
Yeah, it
get
was
too
like
mad at
like
me.
a default yeah, like a generic nice, like, thing to
Yes.
say.
Yeah. Little note there.
Yeah, that actually similar in terms of just a little random note, when AJ when he's doing the little exercises with the school psychiatrist, when he was asking him to draw, and he's like, "I'm drawing a horse and it's going to get his food." It made me like, it just made me think of Pi Oh My and Tony for some reason. It was like the guy, he's off getting food for the horse. So it was just an interesting thing that they had him drawing like a horse and a guy.
I mean, this episode's all about the comparison between Tony and AJ, right? Tony's flashing back to his own childhood with his father, with Junior. We get the carnival scene, first introduction of Janice, the young Janice, before we meet the older one later on. Yeah, they're very much leaning back into the thing they started in Meadowlands, which is AJ is a young Tony and he's dealing with the same things, and Tony's kind of seeing himself in his son.
Oh yeah, I mean even down all the way down to seeing the psychiatrist, which of course AJ rats in this episode and lets the cat out of the bag to Livia about Tony seeing a psychiatrist. So he sort of sets that whole thing in motion.
Again, I think that later episodes or later seasons will deal with this connection in a different way. Again, kind of contrasting the two of them rather than comparing the two. But I have to say, I really do like the ending of Tony just making that Sunday with AJ. It's like we talked about the comforting moments. Yeah, very nice moment, and we'll get very few of those starting in
Yes,
season 2 and beyond.
exactly. That's what I did a video recently where it was like five like what I thought were Tony's best dad moments, and that was one of them because I thought it was just like, and even though AJ was in trouble, he was like showing AJ that like you can still be punished for something or me not be totally happy with you, but I still love you.
Yeah. He has very few good dad moments, to be honest, but
Yeah,
this is
that's why
one of them.
it was very
Yeah.
short list.
Moving on to episode 8, The Legend of Tennessee Moltisanti. I thought it was interesting that right off the bat, The Sopranos is a show known for its elaborate dream sequences. Like we'll get that in Funhouse, we'll get that in the test stream. And even though we've had dream sequences before in Denial, Anger, Acceptance, I think he has a dream about Hesh seeing him there, or maybe it was Meadowlands.
I think it was the beginning of Meadowlands.
Okay, gotcha. But even though we've had some dream sequences, the first like elaborate dream sequence full of symbolism is actually Christopher's dream, not Tony's specifically. This is the first dream that's like, ooh, wild, and it's like there's a bunch of weird stuff happening here.
That's interesting. That's a really interesting point because I feel like when people think of dream sequences, the first place they'll go is Kevin Finnerty, while it's Christopher that had actual.
And we'll have a little bit more with like Isabella, but that's not really like a full. That's more of like a hallucination than a dream sequence. But
That's more yeah.
yeah, it's interesting that Christopher is the first one to get that crazy dream treatment here. There's a lot of symbolism in that dream. The whole Adriana turning into Carmela. Like some people read like incestuous things into that and stuff like that, but. This episode is very much about Christopher's psyche, like what he wants, what he's dealing with, and it's playing off of stuff that's been building in the past few episodes, but this one's very much dedicated to Christopher specifically.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like when I think with when Polly and Christopher have the conversation of, where's my arc, Polly? And I think the way that Polly, in a funny way, of course, says, "Here I am, half a wise guy. So what?" It almost feels like foreshadowing the fact that he's going to survive until the end, and perhaps for the very reason that he's not, always constantly trying to move up and worried about his arc.
I will say, I think that The Legend of Tennessee Multisanti is a weaker version of a storyline we will get in season 2, D Girl. I think they have the same kind of trappings in that episode, but I think they do it a little bit better in that one. Again, I think that's just kind of relating back to my thesis for the season, that like the ideas are all here, but the execution about some of this stuff is going to be done in a better way in future seasons. I felt like a little bit of his like Hollywood stuff did not feel fully, like it didn't land completely for me.
Yeah, right. Well, and I think also it was just because, I mean, like it was so clear that he was not qualified anyway. Like when he was, when Adriana was first helping him, so it was like, yeah, I think he was still trying to sort of just, grow into the character that he was going to be. And by season 2, we kind of have a better idea of who he is, especially in relation to Adriana.
Yeah, that's going to be a big thing in later seasons that we'll talk about. Boca, moving on to this one, we don't have a whole lot of notes. I saw you put a note in here about a line that did not age particularly well for Melfi.
Yes, it says when she tells Tony that the justice system has gotten much better in dealing with sexual predators. They're talking about Coach Hauser, of course. Of course, that, as we see later on in season 3, the law enforcement does not deal very well with certain sexual predators. So it's just something that
The
stuck out
Coach
to me.
Hauser storyline is very interesting, the way they end it, with Tony not pursuing vengeance. Instead, he kind of stumbles in drunk and is like, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. It's an interesting choice. Like, it's a little weird in hindsight that he didn't do anything. And again, I'm not saying I want him or don't want him to do something, but I'm just saying, knowing the character Tony and knowing who he is, it is strange that for this one episode they chose him not do the wrong thing. I say wrong thing with quotes. I'm not passing judgment one
Right,
way or
I know what you
another,
mean. You
but
mean the
yeah, he
aggressive fake.
usually chooses to take action rather than not take action. Like when he's debating, like, should I kick this guy's ass or not kick this guy's ass? He almost always chooses to kick the guy's ass. But in this one instance, for some reason, he didn't do it. And I sort of get what they were going for. Like he's like trying to be a better person in a sense that he's not, taking criminal actions as much. But it's a strange ending overall.
Yeah, well, I think it also some of it had to do with the fact that it would probably look really suspicious and really bad for like for Meadow. Not that people would blame her and say she had anything to do with it, but just like the possibility that then, Tony gets somehow how blamed, and even if Tony didn't do it, I mean, like, the soccer coach of a local high school is murdered, and then, they see, oh, this Meadow Soprano is on the team, and I just, yeah, it would be very, very, very complicated because just like how Davy Scattino is a well-known businessman, this guy's, he's a well-known soccer coach, guy in the community. But yeah, it did end like that was the end of it. Like we never
Yeah,
heard
it's
anything.
odd that people never, like, people constantly bring up employee of the month, right? That like it's unresolved. He didn't deal with the rapist, but no one ever brings up the fact that they didn't deal with with the pedophile here. Like no one's ever like we need to bring that guy back and kill him the way they do Jesus Rossi. And again, I think that's because season 1 in general is just not. When people think about The Sopranos, they think about the later seasons more than season 1. But it's just strange that like people don't say that it was like a plot, an unresolved plot line with Coach Hauser the way they do employee of the month.
Well, I think with Coach Hauser, at least they did arrest him, so at least we do know that he's been arrested, and we don't know what in terms of what he's charged or runs with, but I think also in terms of what we've been saying about being a milder version of Tony, maybe that's another reason why we see him sort of hold back because they're still in that sort of more innocent Tony version.
Yeah. And the next episode here, A Hit is a Hit. What do you think about this episode? Because everyone says this is the worst episode of the show. Do you agree with that or do you not agree with that?
It's hard for me whenever I'm like ranking any Sopranos episode, whether it's like the best or even all the way to the worst. I still feel like, whatever the worst episode of Sopranos is, probably a lot better than many other, best episodes of other series. But it's not something that I'm like get a lot from this episode. I think I enjoy certain quotes from this episode more so than the overall episode. Like, I like when Carmela says, Tony, it's a multiple choice thing with you. I can't tell whether you're old fashioned, boring, or just a fucking asshole. And then, a couple of lines of Polly's. But it's hard for me to put a label on an episode. But I mean, it wouldn't be one that I'd recommend to someone if it was like, oh, I want you to watch a really good episode of The Sopranos.
I think, the whole thing with Tony and the neighbor Cusimano, I think actually is a pretty interesting storyline. Him trying to kind of fit in to the legitimate world and not really being able to. He's viewed as like an object of entertainment.
Right. Well, and they're also kind of like they have their own little corruption, like how the that I was saying, he was like, I don't know how it's how we're different besides not you know taking out guys, basically.
And it's also, you can almost look at it as a commentary about Tony as a character, right? Like he's an object of entertainment for us, the audience, and that's a thing that Chase addresses kind of in the finale, which we'll talk about obviously in future episodes. But I thought that storyline was actually pretty well done. Obviously, what people don't like about this episode is the massive genius, the rapper storyline. It doesn't feel like The Sopranos. It also doesn't really like go anywhere. It doesn't. They just kind of like say, "Oh, we're gonna go to court," and nothing ever comes of it. It's never referenced again. So it just feels like we kind of wasted some time here. Even the whole Christopher Adriana storyline bit doesn't really feel like it has a resolution. Like they don't really ever make up or not make up in any way. It's just like they just kind of drop the whole her being a music producer
Well,
plotline.
no, what's interesting is when I think about how insanely jealous Christopher got when later on in season 3, when she mentions the one guy she's hooked up with. So to me, like, the idea that he would be so like cool about her, going and working with this guy Richie, that he actually knows that they hooked up in the past. I'm like, I don't think season 3 Christopher would be okay with that. So I'm like, yeah, in terms of just, also like different characters having different personalities,
Or
you
massive
know
genius hitting on her too. Like like he's staring at her in a very cringy way. I'll say, like, he doesn't. This guy doesn't come off like a cool rapper. He comes off like a dweeb more than anything else. But yeah, it's just, again, that's kind of goes back to my point earlier of like this not fully feeling like later seasons Christopher. This feels like, and again, you can argue he develops differently over the course of the seasons, but I think all those elements are why a hit is a hit is probably the worst episode for me in the entire series.
Yeah, I mean, and I do like, Hesh. I like his, performance in it separately, but yeah, I mean, that's more on an individual level as
Yeah,
opposed
this
to the overall
any of these
show.
episodes, like you said, are going to be better than most other television shows. Like even the worst Sopranos episode's better than 90% of actual television. But yeah, ranking it on a curve, definitely a low point, and it makes sense because like I said, season 1, they're still figuring things out. They don't have everything dialed in yet, and I really don't think moving forward there's any bad episodes of the series. Like some people will say, like in Camelot, I don't agree. I think that's a great episode. Yeah, hit his hit's probably the worst overall. But moving into episode 11, Nobody Knows Anything, I wanted to talk about Big Pussy because this episode deals with him a lot. It sets up a mystery that kind of wasn't originally supposed to be a mystery, like what happened to Big Pussy. Like David Chase said he was originally just going to leave Big Pussy, like disappeared. It was only the fans' reaction to like where's Pussy that really stirred him on to bring him back in season 2. What do you think about Pussy's storyline this season?
It's interesting because I feel like season 2 Puss is like the real Puss storyline, because with season 1, he's kind of, he's there, of course, in the beginning, and then in the second episode, but then we don't really see much of him again until this episode, and then it's kind of come right out and and oh, okay, no, he's wearing a wire. I do think that he was extremely obvious, in my opinion, when Tony came to his house and was like, things are happening, Tone, things. And I feel like that goes to show how much Tony was in denial at that point, because the way Puss was talking to him, like super shady, like I would be like, what the fuck is going on? But I think that, yeah, he was, it makes me think of Polly's line, nobody knows anything really, because I feel like for season one, Big Puss, nobody knows anything really.
I think it's a very appropriate title because I think that it's clear based on David Chase's statements and also what we see in the show that the writers kind of didn't have a solid idea for Pussy's storyline. It turns out okay because it's just season two is his storyline is very well written, but if you actually look at the background of who Pussy is and he's supposed to be a rat, it kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. We'll talk about this more in season two, but for one thing, he's supposed to be Tony's like best friend. Like Tony says outright, "This guy is my best friend,"
Right,
which
yeah. He's
doesn't
like,
it
I don't
doesn't feel
dislike
that
him, I
way.
love
Yeah,
him.
it doesn't feel that way. It feels like Artie or Silvio are more Tony's like close friend than Pussy. There's also some weird age discrepancies that no one really talks about. Like Pussy's supposed to be older than Tony. We see this in the many scenes where he's already part of the crew before Tony joins, but he's also supposed to be young enough that Tony is like visiting the hospital for his kid sister with him and like they're best friends. It's just to me, Pussy's storyline, it doesn't feel like they fully had a clear concept as to who he's supposed to be until they kind of wrote season two. But by that point, they were already kind of locked in to a storyline about him being a rat.
Yeah, it's interesting how, yeah, with him they don't really, like, I know they deleted a scene that they were gonna have where they, show him actually getting confronted by the FBI, about being a rat. But yeah, I mean, they also, in terms of the timeline, which they talk about more in later seasons, in terms of like basically him getting flipped back in '95. So you'd think like he would have all like years and years worth of information.
It just doesn't make
Um,
sense the way they handled like also I don't know where he actually went during this break in between season one and two. Like the story is that he went to Puerto Rico, and I think there's a line where the FBI are like, we paid for a clinic for your back or whatever, but like I don't actually know where he went during this time. Like I don't have a clear idea of like I know the lie he told, but I don't know what the story is actually suggesting he was doing during all this time.
right, because we even show like in Guy Walks into a Psychiatrist's office, Polly, goes and tells Tony like it's all checked out, like Puerto Rico, the clinic. So they're obviously, yeah, it's like, yeah, what, like who talked to who about what and what was
So
going
the
on.
FBI, I guess the idea is the FBI sent him to Puerto Rico to get his back treated. It doesn't seem like something the FBI would do, like with one of their informants. Like, wouldn't they want him back on as soon as possible? But again, I just think that Pussy's storyline is just very weird when you actually like look at it moment to moment. Again, in season two, it's really good. Like the storyline to do with the character development, it's really good. So I think people forgive these issues. But I think if you actually look critically at Pussy's storyline, a lot of it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think my favorite season one Puss line what might have been when he said, "That's a shame. The medication comes along after your gambling gets your fucking hip busted to shit." That's probably one of my favorite season one Puss moment.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff for him this season. Don't get me wrong, but it doesn't feel fully formed that he's Tony's best
Right, in
friend. It
terms of
doesn't
like
feel like
plot development.
yeah, all that like later on they reference his storyline in 46 Long, the car theft, like chasing down the car, and he's supposed to be really resentful of that. That's one of the reasons he turns on Tony, but we don't see that this season. We don't see any kind of bubbling resentment, but they just kind of invent that in season two and use it as justification for him turning on as a rat. But yeah, I mean, overall,
Yeah.
like I said, I don't hate Pussy. Like I think he's a great character. I just think that like they didn't have a full grasp on who he was yet until they wrote season two.
Right. And even in season two, I mean, I think sometimes people forget because I think a lot of people also that don't really like a lot of people that don't like D Girl. So I think it's easy for some people to forget about how he like probably could have killed Angie when he like went after her when when their son came and intervened. But I mean, he was not really entirely very good
Yeah.
person,
Oh
like
no. I mean, he's an
overall.
awful person. Like it's, and we'll talk about that season two because there's a
Yeah,
lot of great
yeah,
material there with Carmela
yeah.
and Angie and stuff like that. But
Uh-huh.
moving on to Isabella, we talked about Christopher, blocking his
Yeah,
shot and kind of being Tony's guardian angel in that scene. Isabella is it's one of these sequences that I think people like debate about what it's supposed to mean. It's revealed that he's having this vivid hallucination about this woman, this Italian woman who I think obviously represents his mother, like represents this kind of idealized
right,
version of a loving Italian mother. It's very interesting that out of all the beautiful women that Tony encounters, he doesn't really hit on this one at all. He takes her to lunch and stuff, but even in his dream, Carmela gets mad at him. But if you actually look at it, he's not really like flirting with her too much. It's just he almost views
right.
her as like a
Only
maternal figure.
right. Yeah, the only time I feel like he's really like flirty with her is sort of at the beginning where he's like, "Oh, I wish, there are more dental students like you." But yeah, but after that it's more yeah, like we see the dream of him breastfeeding and it's motherly. But I think it's interesting how Dr. Melfi like jumps from his dream about that to then her, wanting to kill him, which I just think that it's like with everything and all the stuff that Tony told her about it, like I get that's why she would think, but it seemed like it was sort of a big leap for Melfi to jump from him having that dream
And
to
that kind of goes back to the idea we talked about before that this season is so focused on psychiatry. Like David Chase talked about one of the premises of the show when he was first coming up with the idea was that the psychiatrist would help Tony figure out that his mother is trying to have him killed. I think in execution, it feels a little forced, like Melfi insisting that like this dream has meaning. She's trying to get him to realize his mother's trying to have him killed. I don't know in real life if you could make that leap. It's like it's just a dream, right? Like I don't think in real life dreams have that much of a deep meaning.
well, and even like later on when she's like, I don't know what the dream is. It's your like for you to, it has to be you. You have to verbalize it
But here they
in the
obviously
process.
they wanted it to be a lead into Tony realizing his mother was the one trying to have him killed, and they're kind of forcing that plot that psychiatry plot line in a way that doesn't feel fully believable to me. But that's just kind of
Yeah, it was same thing with, like, discontinue the lithium. I think, that told, like, in terms of him even being prescribed, like, the lithium, I never really understood because it's people that have bipolar disorder, what I understand. So it just yeah, that seemed like a sort of weird thing for her to just, like, randomly experiment with. But
yeah, and the scene of him pulling up to her, meeting her in her car,
yes,
covertly. It's like
over the line.
I get the idea, but it just feels like a little like okay, this doesn't feel like fully believable to me yet.
Well, that's why yeah, well, that's why, like, if if we were, like, really thinking about it from, like, okay, real world perspective, I would say that, this would be another moment where it's like, okay, this is not a good, doctor-patient relationship because it's sort of gone over the line from doctor-patient to, like, getting pretty involved in each other's personal lives.
One of the few episodes where Tony smokes a cigarette too, I noticed. I've not like fully thought this idea through yet, but we only see him smoking cigarettes a few times. Like he bums one off of Christopher
Yeah,
when
in Legend of
season
Tennessee
four.
Moltisanti. Yeah, and in season 4, and then also I think in the car with Christopher as well in season 1, episode 8,
Hmm.
he takes a cigarette and is smoking. I think when
Oh,
Christopher's driving,
backwards,
it's the
yeah.
whole yeah, when they have the whole the fucking regularness of life conversation. But yeah, it is rare that he does that.
I don't know if it means anything or not. I literally just noticed it when I was doing a rewatch for this podcast, but I was like, there's only a few times he smokes a cigarette in comparison to a cigar.
Oh, and season 2, I just thought of another time, the season 2 premiere when he goes outside, right when he first sees Janice, and then he goes outside to smoke a cigarette, but I think in that case, it was, yeah, more like he just wanted to, like, kind of catch a breather and sort of, like, get to, like, just, like, talk
Yeah, he just
straight
wanted.
with her, but
It might just be as simple as he just wanted to smoke, right? Like, and he didn't have a
right, but it's
cigar with
interesting.
him.
It is interesting though because it is a very, a big contrast from what we're so used to seeing him with is the cigar. Johnny Sack, he's the cigarette guy.
Exactly, and I have a bunch of other ones too. But yeah, Tony's like very much associated with cigars, so maybe a future topic for discussion. But kind of to wrap us up here, I wanted to talk about the final episode, I Dream of Jeannie Cusimano. The thing that just pops out for me every time I think about this episode is that the title really isn't that relevant to the episode itself. Like maybe you have a better explanation for me, but like, yes, it's a reference to a dream he has about having sex with his neighbor's wife, Jeannie Cusimano. For some reason, he imagines Jeannie with a fat ass when she's actually supposed to be very slender. And it's a reference to I Love, I Dream of Jeannie, the sitcom. But I never really understood like, okay, this is the season finale of your, hit TV show, the thing that's going to change television landscape forever. I always just thought it was weird that they have this title of an episode that like really doesn't feel that thematically relevant to what's going on in the episode overall.
Yeah, I think I see what you mean because I'm like even just I'm mentally like zooming through the episode in my head right now, and I'm like, really, other than him having saying that he had a dream about her and the whole the conversation about how well Jean is actually quite slender. It's not like the Kusamanos, they're not really involved in the episode at all, so it's not like there's other than just the fact of okay, we know who the Kusamanos are because we saw them and a hit is a hit, and we know that they're the neighbors. So no, I agree with you. I almost like would want to know what David Chase had in mind with that. I mean, in terms of like, is there another explanation besides the most what we just talked about?
And it'd be one thing like if he just had the dream and it's just talking with Melfi about it,
Right, or any dream really, but he didn't really have any dream. I almost feel like a better name be like sanctuary. I feel like that's kind of what they get at the end. Like in Vesuvio, it's like they sort of get this like shelter and sanctuary, or yeah, I don't know,
Normally
some.
when Melfi like again the whole it's weird that Melfi has that line about like you say she's got a big ass but she's actually a slender woman. Usually when she brings up a discrepancy in Tony's thought process, it's relating back to his mother. It's about like you're thinking this one way but it's really about your mother. That's kind of a recurring theme in their
Oh,
therapy.
right, right. When he said, and then yeah, and even telling him that like, oh, this is someone's mother. Like when she talks to him about Ralph, it's like, oh, usually it goes back to their
Mother,
their,
yeah,
their
but
mother.
also, but Livia, like you would think that maybe it's like an Oedipus thing or something, but Livia, I wouldn't. Livia's slender too. Like I wouldn't. It's not like like he's thinking about his mom when he's thinking about this dream of Jeannie Cusimano. Like there's just no. It's just odd overall. This whole conversation. It just feels like there's no point to it. Like it sounds like just a line that they wrote, and it was a funny line, so they kept it in. But
Yeah, right. Like almost like an inside joke or something that like they figured, okay, like they'll know they'll get the I Dream of Genie part and like oh the
yeah, it just felt
Cusimano,
like
but
just like a joke, a clever thing that like it. But I just think that's a weird thing to do when again this is the culmination of this incredible season of television that completely changed the landscape. To have like compare it to Mad Men's season one finale, The Wheel, super thematically relevant. I don't know if you ever seen Mad Men.
oh yeah, yep, yep, I
I'm
did.
not gonna spoil it
Yep.
for the people who haven't seen it, but like it's describing something in the episode, but it's also extremely thematically relevant to the theme of not only that episode but the whole season. And I honestly just wish that this season finale of The Sopranos had a more relevant title and kind of cohesive idea rather than just this kind of joke in the episode itself.
Yeah, or even now I'm thinking in my head about like possible title names. I'm like, oh maybe the little moments
Little
like this.
moments, yeah, that scene at the end here, which we talked about how season 6 heavily references and mirrors season 1. So but again, it would have been nice to have that. Again, it's not a huge deal overall. I know there's some people who probably really love that title, but it's a amazing episode overall, like an S tier episode for me. Besides that, I just again that little detail bothers me.
No, that's interesting though because I never actually I hadn't like really thought about that. And now I'm actually thinking about it. I'm like, you're right. Like they're real, because yeah, if you think about all the other episode names from this season, there's some way of sort of connecting it back with this. It's like okay, it's just sort of a random joke.
Well, you could say the same thing, I think, about the Legend of Tennessee Moltisanti. Like, I get it's a reference to Tennessee Williams, who is a screenwriter and playwright. I don't quite know what that has to do with Christopher. Like, you could say that
Well, I
about
think this because he wants to be one. Like he he wants to become a screenwriter, when he's writing his script. So I think maybe sort of that was
I
kind of what
but
I
like any it could have been any writer, and more so that title works for season 2 more when he's doing the acting class and Big Girls Don't Cry, because I think they do. Maybe I'm just imagining. I had to look it up, but I think maybe they do a Tennessee William scene.
Yeah, well, and then Adriana, I know when she mentioned, I think in the Legend of Tennessee Multisanti, she mentioned she's like my Tennessee Williams, so that might have been
Oh, okay,
why
maybe that's
they
why.
why they named it for that. But yeah, but you're right in that they don't really go like too much into it, like in terms of
And
why
again,
the nickname.
not to say that everything has to be perfectly like it has to work on 100 different layers, but I'm just saying they could have put a little more thought into into the finale specifically. But I mean, just an incredible episode overall.
Definitely, definitely.
Well, yeah, I think that's a good place to end it here. I mean, was there any thoughts about this season you wanted to that you didn't get a chance to talk about?
I mean, I think we covered everything really well. Season one, it definitely, I think, started off the series and a lighter note, literally and metaphorically. And of course, we get more as we get more into the foundation of the series, college and whatnot. When we get exposed to more of the darker side of things, but I mean, I really enjoyed it. It has, a few of my sort of comfort food episodes, the kind of, the lighter ones. But yeah, of course, as you said, there certainly were some growing pains, but
That's a great
I'd
way
say
to put it.
probably my
Growing pains. I like that.
yeah, but probably I'd say my second or third favorite season overall.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you all for joining us for this. Next episode, we're going to be discussing season 2. So definitely check that out if it's available when you're listening to this. I'll have links to our show notes with where you can check out Sopranos Blueprint, her social media posts there. But join us next time because we're going to continue this discussion all the way to the series finale. So thank you all for listening and talk to you soon.
Listen, thanks for having me.